Thank you for looking at the Zamok website. From time to time I record messages usually concerning biblical prophecy and current events, but also from time to time I choose to look at a specific portion of Bible and pick up a specific biblical theme, and that's what I want to do this week. In the synagogues across the world, the Jewish people consider from week to week a different portion of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah. And so the whole 5 books are divided in small sections, and week by week a new section is studied. And so we're at the end of October, and so the section that's being studied currently is the beginning of the revelation of God's purpose to this man Abraham, recorded from Genesis 12 through 17, referred to as Lech Lecha, meaning you go where I show you. Now, we want to consider that revelation because it's very, very important for any of us as believers today. And so we want to consider the call and the covenant that God made with this man Abraham. Also, we want to begin to see the association of Abraham and his descendants with this specific land that God refers to. And then in a subsequent study, hopefully we'll get a chance at looking at the special son that God promised to Abram and see the significance of that to us. But we're just going to cover the first 2 areas, the covenant and the land, today. Now, in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3, the beginning of this section of study, the beginning of a redemptive, positive action on God's part to redeem the whole of mankind and the physical creation, God says to Abraham, you leave the home of your father, your ancestral homeland. We think perhaps he was at Haran in Mesopotamia, along the Euphrates. Go where I show you, and I will bless you. I'll cause your name to be great. I'll give you a multitude of descendants. And the ministry aspect of this is, I'm going to make you and your seed after you a special blessing to all of the families of earth. In other words, a special blessing is going to come through Abraham and his descendants from God to the whole of mankind. Now, as we consider the entirety of the Bible, and if we look at that from a historical standpoint, we can begin to get some sort of sense of what that means, although perhaps in a limited way. Now, so God made specific promises to Abraham. In chapter 13, he tells you, look northeast, southwest, all the land that you see, I'm going to give to you. So he's focusing on this particular piece of real estate. And later in chapter 15, God cuts the covenant with Abraham, and he says to them that I'm going to give you he defines the land as the land between the river of the Egyptians and the great river, the Euphrates. He uses the word Nahar Mitzrayim and Nahar Haggadah, the river of the Egyptians and the great river, the Euphrates. And so the sea coast, the seaboard of Mediterranean, from Egypt to Mesopotamia, inland, actually as you go beyond the Jordan you really hit desert, so inland to the desert was the territory that God was given to Abraham. Now we want to consider, as he cut the covenant with Abraham, recorded in chapter 15, God commanded Abraham to slaughter animals, and he divided them in halves and separated them, and God passed between the parts that Abraham had cut. And hence we get the concept of cutting a covenant. And the specific terminology that is used to describe God's appearance in this particular case, Abraham saw it in a vision and dreams. He used the word Tanur Ashan, recorded as a smoking oven, and a lapid ish, a flaming torch, torch of fire. And that, if we take it by itself, may not mean a great deal to us. However, then the reason I want to bring it up is because in subsequent revelation we see something comparable, and we're really talking about the same thing. You'll know, of course, that later, as God brought Israel out of Egypt, He led them cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. At Mount Sinai, God descended on the mountain in a cloud, and there was fire and lightning and so on. And so we see the same phenomena, cloud, smoke, and fire, as the physical reaction, we believe, to the presence of God in the physical creation. And so therefore the same cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night that led Israel out of Egypt spoke and cut a covenant with Abraham. And so we bring that up just to provide the continuity in the revelation, because God progressively reveals His purpose as we work our way through the Scriptures. Now in chapter 17, in addition to the addendum to the covenant was made in the sense of circumcision, but that has to do with the revelation of the special Son, which we'll get to hopefully next week. Now, the second area that we want to briefly touch on is the association of the people of God with the land of God. God spoke to Abraham saying, "You go where I show you." And obviously God had already chosen the land. So we want to say that God chose the land before He chose the people. And He promised this land to Abraham and his descendants after him. Now, the fact that God had already chosen this land implies that this small geographical area has a very special function in God's overall purpose of redemption. Now, generally, as Christians today, we look all around the world, and one place seems to be as good as the other, and in most aspects that's true. But not all lands are created equal in that regard, and this particular territory has a special purpose and special significance on the part of God. Now, in a couple of weeks, we'll study God's revelation to Abraham's grandson Jacob, and then we'll begin to really see God's revealed purpose for this land. Now, when God brought Abraham into the land, He emphasized the importance of these particular areas, I think simply by the way He was revealed or manifested Himself to Abraham. Obviously, God revealed Himself in some sense to Abraham in Mesopotamia, because He spoke to him and Abraham followed Him. But we find Him in the land. We find Him first at a place called Elon Moreh, which is modern-day Shechem, also known as Nablus. And here God reveals Himself in such a profound way that Abraham builds an altar and names it and calls on the name of the Lord. A little bit later, a little bit further south, 30 miles or so, at Bethel, the same thing happens again. Later, the same thing happens at Hebron. Later, the same thing happens at Jerusalem. So all of these sites now are on the mountain crest, right down the heartland of Israel. And so God, the implication is God revealed Himself in a super profound way to Abraham, because he built altars and called on the name of the Lord in these places. Now, that gives us a hint that God considers this area very, very important. It's an area that is maybe 60 to 70 miles long and perhaps 30 miles wide. Some very, very small area. In Israel, this area is referred to as Judea Samaria. In the world in general, it's referred to as the West Bank. Now, you recognize immediately when I use the terminology West Bank that this is the most highly contested geographical area in the world. It doesn't have any great resources other than spiritual in nature, but it is the heart of the whole Middle East conflict. And that gives us more indication of the spiritual significance of this territory. So now, as days go by and you study the Scriptures and read current events, you're going to find more and more contention and polarization as a result of the conflict over this area. Remember, God chose it first, and because He did, that is the reason that the nations and the Muslim world in particular wants to wrestle it out of the hands of Israel. That's our short program for today. Next week we'll try to look at the special son.